Hey and welcome to Neverwinter with Aragon. Last week there was a whole new rework to the mount system, and with it came these new mount collars. Now in this video I'd like to go over which ones are actually the best for, the tanking and healing roles for a Neverwinter. This will mainly be based for endgame players who like to run the top tier endgame trials like Zarya or Tower of the Mad Mage. In this video I'll go over which ones will be best for those two roles. Here I am on my tank build. We go over to the mount section and we'll quickly jump over to the stable. Here you can see I have my 5 mythic mounts with 5 mythic collars. Now each of these collars have to be unique to each other. As you can see here, this one is labeled practical and this one being sturdy. You cannot have two of the same type of collar slotted in your stable. For example, if I go ahead and slot another supportive collar, you can see it will X out both of my supportive collars and thus I won't gain the benefits from either of them. So you have to go ahead and have, let's say, a practical one. Now, on top of this, the rarity of your collar has to match that of your mount. Well, at least the rarity can be lower quality than your mount, but it cannot be higher. For example, if I go ahead and switch this mount out for, let's say, a green mount, you can see it will also go ahead and cross out this collar, and I won't gain any benefits from it. So with regards to the collars and the fact that you must have one of each type or just no collar there whatsoever, we have to go ahead and start a practical one. Now if we actually go ahead and look at our options for a practical collar, well, none of them are going to particularly help you in your role specifically in combat, and thus it doesn't particularly matter which one you choose. Now the other ones, the other 4, are the ones I have specifically gone through and chosen the ones that I believe are the best. First up then we have our sturdy one, giving you bonus to encounter power damage. Now of course this can vary between the tanking style which you generally play. Personally I believe I like to have that burst damage at the beginning so I can sustain that aggro. As for aggro throughout the fight, generally it can be easily sustained with just my at-will, and buffing it by 5% more is not particularly needed. If you play a fighter tank, you may want to consider choosing the at-wills to buff that at-will damage, as you kind of rely on that a whole lot more than your hard taunt. As for a paladin, we are fortunate enough to have a smite which deals a whole lot of damage and also has the added effect of being a hard taunt. Now moving on to our supportive one. I highly recommend stamina regen, as when you are in endgame content, you're going to want to regenerate that shield as much as you can and as quickly as possible. Moving on to our unified, I highly recommend incoming healing just to help out your healer heal you a whole lot better, and increasing your survivability overall. If you don't have as much of the incoming healing as you possibly can and you die as a result, you can't exactly blame the healer. Of course, an alternative to this one that I highly would recommend would be the movement speed one. This can be very helpful, especially when you just want to speed through content, let's say dungeons and stuff, where you just want to get places and you can't hop on your mount. Last but not least, we have our wayfaring mount collar. For here, I highly recommend using recharge speed, essentially for all the tanks, including us paladins, even though we do have our smite, which is limited to our divinity pool and not our cooldowns. Recharge speed will greatly increase the rate at which you can cast those encounter powers that have, yes, those insanely long cooldowns. If you look here, I'm looking at a total of 20.7 seconds on my Binding Oath and 25.9 seconds on my Sacred Weapon. If I go ahead and remove this 5% recharge speed, you can see now that Binding Oath has increased by a total of 0.9 seconds and Sacred Weapon has increased by a total of 1.2 seconds. And thus this recharge speed, that being only 5%, is very beneficial, as you'll be able to cast these powers a whole lot more often, Binding Oath giving you that ability to regenerate that stamina a whole lot quicker, and Sacred Weapon giving the ability to increase your threat by a decent amount. Of course, alternatively, you could use, let's say, crit severity to increase just that outgoing damage by buffing those crits. Finally, we move over to my healer build. On my healer build, I'm using the same mounts. They may have switched around a little bit, but they are still the same mythic mounts with the same insignia bonuses. However, I have switched out the insignia bonuses to brutality and dominance to give that extra power, so I can, increase that outgoing healing. Now for the actual mount collars, I have of course here the practical one. There's no point in having any other than the same one, and it's not going to benefit you in your role, so we'll just move on to our sturdy. The only 3 you can obtain here is bonus to at-will damage, encounter damage, or daily damage. Now as a healer, dealing damage is of least importance to us, so this ain't going to help us whatsoever, so this is going to be your last priority. Moving on to our supportive, I highly recommend our outgoing healing. As our outgoing healing sources are very limited, 5% is actually quite a generous amount, and we can't obtain a whole lot more than that from anything else. If we look at our companions, you can see they have been reduced down to 3% outgoing healing. The largest source to our outgoing healing is in fact our wisdom currently, giving me, as you can see there, a total of 7.3%. If I look now, I have managed to increase my total outgoing healing to a maximum of 31.3%. So let's move on to our unified. I highly recommend using the incoming healing one to increase your survivability. However, of course, if you feel you need to move around much quicker, definitely take the movement speed one. Your own survivability is in your own hands entirely through you, because yes, you are the healer. So keep in mind you also need to heal yourself. Moving on to our wayfaring one, I highly recommend our crit severity. Yes, the effective bonus gained from crit severity has been reduced by 50%, however, it is still a buff, especially on us paladins, as we have the ability to essentially gain that critical touch, where we can guarantee that our next heal will be a crit, and thus we actually benefit from critical severity a whole lot more than any other healer would. So yes, those are the collars that I highly recommend to use on a healer, only 2 of which have much impact at all. As for the actual mounts I'm using these ones here. Most of them you can see are actually purple mounts. The only one that's not would be the armor griffin, which is originally legendary. The other 4 here were originally purple, and you can go ahead and upgrade them all the way to mythic, actually relatively cheaply. That being at only 1,700,000 astral diamonds through those mount tokens, of course. Now, to actually get that bolster to 100%, you're of course going to need 10 of these mythic mounts. Yeah, quite a lot. But just take it slow and take your time and just slowly upgrade them. With an endgame character, of course, you definitely want this bolster at 100% to make sure that you can either get like this dominant force to give that 15,000 again and that maximum amount of combined rating. As you can see here, all of these ratings will display as at their maximum due to the fact my bolster is at 100%. You can see stalwart there giving a maximum of 60,000 HP, so if I needed that HP buff I would gain a whole lot here. Of course, that being the mount which would benefit giving that stalwart would have to also be mythic, which yes, it is. And then of course our bolster also affects our mount combat power there, giving that piercing screech from the griffin that top 15% as it actually used to be. Anyway, this whole mount upgrading and collars and whatnot is a very expensive ordeal. At the moment you're looking at least 10 million astral diamonds just for a freaking mythic collar. It will take you some time to grind these out and actually find the ones that are best for you. And yes, this video has essentially been the mount collars that I believe best for both healing and tanking. If you've any other thoughts and opinions of your own that may contradict mine, feel free to leave them in the comments below and we can argue about it. If I presented this well, consider leaving the video a like, and if you're new around here, consider subscribing. And we'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye for now.